Mr. JavaScript? Senor JavaScript? All right, great. So this is Brandon, not the beloved senior program manager Brandon, but the inventor of JavaScript. Cool, so this is just going to take you through a brief history, and we're going to talk about some of the important things that have happened. So the reason JavaScript is a little bit weird is because the entire language, the base language, was written and produced in about 10 days. Cool? So the time it took you to do your Mod 2 project, he wrote JavaScript. Cool? Yeah. Can't wait to be a senior dev. Right? So that's really about it. Cool. History over. All right, so the thing about JavaScript is that it did not take off immediately. Didn't take off super fast. It wasn't that, hey, I invented this language in 10 days. I posted it all over Medium, and then I had all my Twitter and Instagram followers just pick up this language, and then all of a sudden Oracle bought it and was like, great, I'm going to support this language. What happened was we needed a way to basically do extra requests, right, within the browser that we did not have at the time. So in your Rails apps, right, the reason I wanted you to feel this pain, and I specifically was like, don't use JavaScript, because how painful was it to try to do something, but then when you click something, it did a full page refresh every single time. That full page refresh. Who likes that? Is that a good user experience? Every time I click a button, anytime I do anything on your website, it's a brand new full page request. It's terrible. Wouldn't it be nice, say like you're on Twitter, on your Instagram, and you scroll to the bottom of the page, more posts, tweets, pictures just loaded, right? And that's the power of JavaScript. And so it wasn't until we got into things like Gmail where it really took off. Because who wants to sit there on their computer and constantly hit the refresh, or every single time you go back to your desk, you hit refresh on your email and just be like, hey, did I get any emails? Shouldn't it just basically be updating on its own? Right? And kind of that sort of functionality is why JavaScript took off. So something called AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So in order to get these new pieces of mail, the mail was written in this like markup language called XML, extensible markup language. Yeah? Yeah. And so JavaScript was used to grab these XML files and then add them to the screen. And so that created that seamless updating experience that everyone loves, and JavaScript took off. Cool? Boop, 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 boop. All right, great. This is not, why is this image so big? Wow, look at this. All right, cool, great. Good deal. So basically, I'm just going to go through this README, and you'll see in Mod 3, thanks to the amazing and powerful Andrew Chromeboy Cone in the back. We got some golf claps, apparently. You will see all the READMEs are extremely thorough. And so if you ever need a refresher, you could just jump right back into the README. And we'll add to the README as we go through the lecture, just so you can see those specific examples that we'll go through here. Cool? So basically, Google Maps and Gmail is when JavaScript basically took off, right? So right now, the JavaScript that we know and love today is known as ECMAScript. Can you guys see that, or do you want it like bigger? Cool? All right, so ECMAScript. What that is, the reason it was formed is because back in the day, who remembers like Netscape Navigator? And then Internet Explorer? Internet Explorer didn't die that long ago. Cool? No? Nobody? Were you guys born in 2005? Jesus. Right. So your JavaScript runs inside the browser. What that means is each individual browser will execute your JavaScript slightly differently, which, as you can imagine, could lead to potential confusion. Does that make sense? So like if Internet Explorer is running your JavaScript and then Google Chrome is running your JavaScript, it can run it slightly differently. So what does that mean to you as a user? The experience is not going to be exactly the same based on the browser that you had. Who remembers like, okay, well, who remembers this? Huh? Surfing the web. Do you remember that? Who says that nowadays? Surfing the web? Cool. Who remembers? Thank you. Who remembers this? Let's see if we could find this. Not the browser wars. This bad boy right here. Best viewed in Netscape Navigator. Do you remember this? There were icons like this all over, and it was because specifically the browser was interpreting and running your JavaScript a little bit differently. So that sometimes, who does remember back in like probably the late 90s, early 2000s, it was like, oh, it doesn't work in Firefox. You have to use Edge. Or no, Edge didn't exist at the time. You have to use Internet Explorer. Like certain websites didn't work. You had to use a different browser. And so that's part of the browser wars. So naturally, organizations need to come together and be like, great, we need to define how JavaScript runs. At a bare minimum, every single browser should be able to do this or X when JavaScript runs this function. Cool? Does that make sense? So ECMAScript, I forget what it stands for, like European Computer, there it is. European Computer Manufacturers Association. They came together and they standardized JavaScript. This is back in 2015, was a very, very large, major update to JavaScript. It added important things to what is known as modern JavaScript. And so ES 2015, right? 2015 is when the version ECMAScript 6 came out. And every year after that, there is a new version of JavaScript that adds new features and fundamentals to the baseline language. We're going to teach you ES5 and teach you ES6. So the baseline of JavaScript when it first came out, ECMAScript, and then all the modern features in ES6, because you must understand how JavaScript's running in order to properly debug it. Are there any questions on why we teach an old version of JavaScript? Cool. Great. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, so the browser wars, right? Leaves us with weird legacy JavaScript. Cool. So weird things that you always want to check for. Not always, but you'll see. I think I wrote some of this code earlier. So you can always use Navigator, check the user agent, and you'll see exactly which browser I'm using. Then it's just an if statement, right? So if navigator.useragent, like .name is equal to Chrome, then do something like this. That's how you create that backwards compatibility with older versions of the browser and then different versions of the browser, whether it's Mozilla, like Firefox, Chrome, Opera, like BlackBerry. Yeah. Throwbacks? Great. Okay, cool. Don't care. Sweet. Let's start with a review of the request response cycle, just so we kind of understand what the benefits are. In your Rails app, you have this browser here, right? Boop, boop, boop. And the user will click on something, whether it's that search functionality button or creating a new user or logging in. What happens? They send that get, post, put, patch, delete request back to your Rails server, your backend, and then what? Rails routes intercepts it, hits a specific controller, possibly talks to the model if it's going to create or edit something, and then it sends back a response. Who remembers when I was lecturing you back in Sinatra, Shudder, right? Or in Rails, I always say that inside each of the controller actions, I say, first you talk to the model, and then you send back a response. And then immediately after, I'm like, for now, that response is going to be that ERB. I always said explicitly to say render. Do you remember that? And it's because you can render more or other things aside from just HTML. What other things do you think you can render or send back as a response? Right. Sometimes you don't need the full HTML. Sometimes you just want data to come back from the server. And that data, it comes back in the form of JSON. So what does JSON stand for? Very good. Cool. Let's use hands, you know what I'm saying? Let's do that. All right, great. So we get it back in JSON, right? And JSON, if you remember, is this language agnostic sort of data structure. Because what if I'm writing it in Ruby? What if I'm doing it in JavaScript? What if I'm doing it in Python? I need to be able to parse this data and use it regardless of the language that I'm writing it in. Cool? Great. That's pretty much it. So we can load JavaScript in a couple of ways. We can either do a script tag inside JavaScript, inside the HTML directly, or we can load it inside the head and reference a JavaScript file. So what I mean by that is, here we have index.html. I can point to a particular script file, or inside this body, I can literally just open a script tag and then put right here console log, and it should execute work. Cool? Just so you can see it. This is a pretty hacky way. We don't really do this anymore. We put everything inside a JavaScript file. That JavaScript file gets loaded inside the head, and then you have access to it inside your body of your HTML. Cool? That make sense? Great. Great. Let's get back to this sweet, sweet README. Great. There are new data types to understand in JavaScript outside of what you already know in Ruby. Cool? Those 7 data types are symbol, all right? We're not going to touch on this, really, but just know that a symbol is a unique data structure in JavaScript, and we do not use it in the same way that we do in Ruby. All we do with these symbols is we allow them to point to a particular value inside an object. So you've seen this already inside. You've seen this like in Ruby, right? You had like some hash, and then you had a symbol of like a key. Does that make sense? Yeah. We could do the same thing in JavaScript, except the symbols have like different characteristics to them, right? If I iterate through a hash, do those symbols come up in Ruby? Yes. If I iterate through a hash, if I iterate through an object in JavaScript, symbols do not come up. The only way to get them is to specifically call for the symbols, right? They add some like additional capabilities to your objects. But the bottom line is, they're a way for object to point to a value that has different functionality than a regular, say, string. Cool. You will not really be using symbols. Definitely not here at Flatiron School. But just know that they exist. If you want a deeper dive, I'll send you out some resources. Cool. Undefined. What is undefined? You guys done the labs. A placeholder. Cool. Great. So what I've seen a pattern is when I ask you guys some of these terms, you have an idea of what it is, you've practiced with it, you've played with it, but a lot of you have a difficult time articulating the exact terminology that you need. So I'm going to do my best to explain it, break it down Barney style, and then explain it technically. Get used to explaining it technically. You will have to do so, not just to sound smart, but it will be very useful to you, especially when it comes down to interviewing. Cool? So let's see an example. Ready? If I were to do var, all right, your boy, what do you think your boy would be? It's undefined. Why?
Because the compiler automatically assigns it undefined if you do not assign it
Yes, right? So the answer is that the compiler will assign it undefined. We were going to get into hoisting, scopes, and closures, and why this happens this afternoon. This afternoon's like scopes and closures lectures. Just know that undefined means that the variable does not have an assigned value. You did not assign it a variable. However, you did not assign it a value. However, the variable exists. Versus if I were to just say, my boy, does that exist? Did I ever declare this variable anywhere? No. So this variable is not defined, but this one is undefined. Words mean things, cool? Really tricky. Not defined means that I never really even declared it. That variable does not exist even in memory. However, this one, the variable exists in memory, but it has no assigned value. So you could think of undefined as not assigned a value. If I now ask you, hey, what is undefined, would you be able to explain it? It's like a quick thumbs up or a thumbs down if you can explain undefined comfortably. Cool. Great. What is null? Null is very much like nil in Ruby, where you specifically assign it a value of sort of like nothing, right? Because 0 technically has like a value, right? 0 exists. 0 means that you don't have a quantity of something. Versus null, which means that it doesn't even exist. Something you specifically assign that does not exist, right? So null is not an empty string, and null is not 0. It is a specified value that does not exist. Cool? Something like this could be useful if you want to make sure you control your variables and you specify, hey, when I first declare this, and I say something like var exists, but right now I want it to be null. The parser, right, when JavaScript gets transpiled, will read and recognize that I've assigned a specific value, and so it should not be undefined. Undefined should be used as like a debugging tool because the parser runs through your code and says, hey, you never defined this. Oh, great, thanks. I've caught that. Being more explicit means that you're in more control and that you are writing code with purpose. You have a question, Dave? They are not interchangeable, no. Also, nil and 0 in Ruby should not be interchangeable either. You cannot nil plus plus. If you start at 0, you can 0 plus plus. Okay. It's all good, yeah. I think what you're thinking about is that you're checking to see if something is just truthy or falsy, and that 0 and nil are almost interchangeable in that sense. Only if you're checking a truthy or falsiness. Cool? And you'll do the same in Cool? The legend continues, Andrew. Cool. All right, what about Boolean? Come on now, stop playing. Stop playing, right? We're just talking about true and false in here, right?
It's actually called Boolean instead of true false.
Very good. What about number? How is number different from what you know it as to now in Ruby land?
It's got like floats and integers.
It's not that it has floats and integers in it. It's just that if you remember in Ruby, everything is an object. But what does that really mean? It means that everything in Ruby was done something like array.new. But then you could have just done an array literal like this. All right? Have you checked the class of a number in Ruby? What does it give you? It gives you integer specifically, right? What does that mean? That means that it doesn't have any of those extra decimal places, right? There's no extra data structure like there is in Ruby that can handle like integers or floats. In JavaScript, number encompasses everything, right? So there's no separate data structure for like integer and float. It's just number. So you have 3.2 will be the same data structure as 3, where it will be different in Ruby. Are there any questions as to how Ruby and JavaScript handle numbers differently? Cool. So numbers are different in JavaScript specifically in that I cannot do 3 and then a method on 3. Whereas Ruby, I can. Right? I can do 3 times do. That is a method call on Ruby. All right? Whereas number has to be called passing an argument from math. So like math dot, I don't know. Look at all these like amazing things we can do. Math dot rand. Let's see. Like log, sine, round, ceiling, floor. I have to call math and then pass in a number, right? So like math.floor with 3.2. That'll give me 3. It rounds it down. Versus, how would I do that same thing in Ruby? I'll do something similar, right? Like in Ruby, like 3.1 as an object. How would I do that? And then I can call a method on it. So there's just slight differences in JavaScript in the way that it handles numbers. Are there any questions just on the number primitive for JavaScript? Cool. All right, string. String is like what? Very good. Strings are strings. They act almost exactly the same way. The only difference is how we interpolate them. Cool? And then finally, what is object here? You will learn and love these things. It looks like a hash, right? So this right here is just an object in Ruby. Cool? Object literal. Yes. There is, notice how in here, in the data types, do you have array in here? Which it would be different in Ruby, right? But this, it doesn't look like a Ruby, right? It's completely different. Nice, you guys like that? Out of control. Arrays are special types of object in JavaScript. Cool. Are there any questions on the different data types? We're going to go a little bit deeper into them, but just right now, you should know that there are 7 versus what? 5 in Ruby? I don't know how many there are. It's cool. All right, so check it out. Constructors are just like the initialize method inside Ruby. All right, so constructor versus like a literal. Here you can literally assign and create a new number by just doing this, by doing this, and by doing this. Notice how they're different. If I do new number and just number, they create different points in memory. Does anyone have a wild guess or idea as to why or what is happening here? When I do some number is number 1, and then some new number is a new number 1, and I compare some new num, which is the new number, with just 1, and it becomes false. But some num, right here, compared to another num, returns true.
Is it that the new keyword is like assigning some sort of prototype value to the new number?
I'm going to give you a loose operator yes, right? I'm very good, thank you. JavaScript jokes early. So what is happening here is this new keyword assigns a new place in memory. It's creating a new reference to a new number in memory. And this is going to make a little bit more sense as we talk about something called pass by value and pass by reference. All right? So I can just do number like this and new number, and they will be different things. All right? So far, that's all you really need to understand before we get to the next step. Are there any questions on that? Cool. So primitives. Everything you see here, so your numbers and your strings, they're primitives. So here. Primitives are passed by value. Let's just follow this README. I don't want to like jump around. You can do single quotes, you can do double quotes, and it does not matter. If you want to string interpolate, you lose both the single and the double. You simply pass in this backtick, and then you can use this sweet, sweet money sign to interpolate right into your JavaScript. You will now hear me reference this as money. Cool. Are there any questions on how to do string interpolation? Versus here would be what in Ruby? The hash sign, right? Cool. Here we have numbers here. Oh, that's what it is. Parse in is the thing I'm looking for. Cool. What are these? Right, just negative, exponent, float, not a number, all under number, which I alluded to earlier, that are not different sort of data structures as they are in Ruby. They're all just under number. Cool? You can run methods, you can run functions on numbers, but look how it does it. So here we can have parse int, and what does parse int do? It takes a string, right, and returns what it believes is the equivalent number value. Is that a decent explanation? So like I could take a string of 1, 2, 3, and it should give me 1, 2, 3. What happens if I try to add in a not number in here? Right? Like let's say I put in A. What is NaN? Not a number, right? Cool? Because A is not really a number. That just makes sense. But if I were to do, say, 1, 2, 3, and then put A, what would happen? It'll give you 1, 2, 3. It will attempt to parse int this whole thing. It will see 1, 2, and 3, and then it'll see A and be like, oh, that's not a number, and stop. But it will actually attempt it. Even if you were to go to the end, it'll hit that first character and just go, hey, just kidding, stop the madness, and break off. Cool? What do you think will happen? Because the first thing it reads is not a number, and it will return not a number. Cool? It's exactly the same as if you just tried this. It'll just be like, oh, just kidding, and then break contact. It will return this value. Yeah? Cool. There are some new rules to Booleans. All right? Something that you need to memorize. Need to memorize these. Cool? What are the 3 things in Ruby? False and nil are false. Everything else is truthy. In JavaScript, it's not the same. False is false. Thank God. What about 0? Come on, help me out here. Right? Thank you. Empty string? Is an empty string truthy in Ruby? Different. Cool. Nil is false, right? Null. All right, same thing here. Undefined is false. Not an error. Cool? And then, of course, not a number is false. Everything else is truthy. There's nothing I can tell you except you just have to memorize these. It's not that complicated, but the biggest one is kind of this. 0 and empty string. They will return false. Cool? Good deal. Boop, 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 boop. All right. Something known as primitives and non-primitives. Who believes they understand pass by value and pass by reference? Nobody? Come on. You did the readings? What's going on? Great.
So pass by value is doing what it sounds like it's simply passing a value, whereas pass by reference is pointing, or passes it tells you exactly where that object is. So if that object changes, then there is the thing that you assign.
That's pretty good. Did everyone understand that? Great. All right, let me explain. So when something is passed by value, it means that in the same way that we had this right here, this number, who thinks that these two made sense? Another num and some num. this line of code. Did this make sense to you? Right? That's the pass by value. This right here is pass by reference. This is false. And here, let me explain in a few examples. Ready? If I were to say x equals to 1, Ruby, right? Let x equal to 1. And I were to say y, sorry, I'm in Ruby land. Let y equal to x. Cool. What do you think y's value will be? So far, so good. If I were to do, have you seen this yet? What does this mean? It just means return y and then add 1. Cool? So yeah, exactly. So y equals to y plus 1. So far, so good? Great. I changed y. I mutated y's data. What do you think happened to x? Nothing, right? That'd be crazy. Look at y, 2. Look at x, 1. That's passing by value. They have the same value. I'm sorry, they retain their own values. Whoa. Cool? So like, if you're passed by value, x, anything you do with x happens to x. Anything you do with y happens to y, right? Like Vegas style. Cool? Great. Let's take in an object. So let's let Andrew, right, equal to, let's see, a cool name like Chromeboy. TM. Cool. So far, so good? Right? Nothing wild. What about let Charlie equal to Andrew? What is the value of Charlie? If I were to ask for Charlie, what should I see? I should see name Chromeboy, right? Nothing crazy. If I were to go, hey Charlie, I want you to have a new key, right? Like, I don't know, you have a dog or something? Okay, dog equals to true, right? Nothing wild. Charlie has this dog, and it's true. If I were to reference now Andrew, what should I see? Should I see this dog on Andrew? Okay, well, let's find out. Psych. Yes, this is one of the weirder things that happen with JavaScript, and here is why. Primitives are passed by value. It works in the way that you think it works, right? Vegas style. What happens to x stays with x, what happens to y stays with y. However, with non-primitives, objects, right? And remember I mentioned arrays are a special type of object. Happens with arrays as well. Here we have just a simple object literal, and we assign it to Andrew. When I assign Charlie and Andrew to be the same, objects are passed by reference, meaning they are in the same place in memory. So, if Andrew takes up memory space 1001, and I said, hey, Charlie, you are now equal to Andrew. I did not create a new object. I simply said, whenever I reference Charlie, I will point to memory space 1001, the same space in memory. So if I changed Charlie, and Andrew and Charlie point to the same place in memory, if I mutate or add something to Charlie, that same thing will happen to the pointer of Andrew. Andrew is just pointing to the same thing that Charlie is pointing to in memory. Are there any questions on this? Pass by reference and pass by value. Let's go back to that number. Let's take a look at that, and then we will answer questions. Here I have a number, right? It's just the value of 1. When I created a new number, I put in some new num a different place in memory. So does this one, right, another num, strictly equal to new number one, which is pointing to a different place in memory? No. So it should return false. Does this line make more sense to you? Just a quick thumbs up or a thumbs down if it made more sense, if it makes no sense, if you can attempt to re-explain it to me. Great. What are your questions? Because I saw a couple hands.
Back to the screen console here. Yeah, so if you would change vice versa, if you would change.
If I mutate Andrew?
Yes, and it will also affect Charlie.
Because they're both
Referencing
the same place in memory. Cool?
How would you ever want to point to the same place in memory, I guess? Is that why would you want to have the power pointing to the same place in memory at any point in time?
Why would I want to have?
Reason for that? Or
It's the way JavaScript was written. There are cool things you can do with it. Yeah, and that will be covered in the future. I don't want to get too bogged into the intro, but there will be a lot of good times we'll do that. You want to jump in?
Yeah, it's something we can just talk about later today, etc. It's one of the more kind of, it's important, and you'll want to leverage it.
Right. It's gonna derail the lecture. That's why. But there are good reasons for it. Very good question though.
Just quick on the number part. When you do some new num, it's creating a new number one that is new.
That is pointing to a different place in memory.
So every time you do new number one, it's a new memory spot, which is why it's equal to.
Yes, because this new, right, and I was going to get into it, but the question leads right into it, is doing what have you seen in Ruby, right, when I do this? Or I have a class dog, and I do dog.new, and I pass in, like, Winfield. Do you remember the Ruby object that comes back? It says dog hashtag like 47kx39 whatever. That's the point in memory it's referencing, which are going to be different than when I do dog.new again, and then dog.new again, and then dog.new again. When I do this new, I'm saying I'm allocating a new place in memory for this variable. Did that clear it up?
Yeah, and one minor thing too, this is different than just saying like the number one, right? When I say new number, it creates a new object, whereas if I say just is integer one strictly equal to integer one.
Yes. Let's see that in the console, right?
Just so we can see the difference, right? It's
Right.
not the same.
So number one just has that value of 1. New number 1 gives me this one number object that has methods I can call on. Cool? So slightly different. And we will understand more about this proto, constructor, and everything in like a future lecture. But just know that they're different. Exactly. So does this make more sense now? Cool. All right, let's keep going. Great. Okay. Notice when I talked about data types and data structures, did you see function as a data type? What do you think functions are? They're just like arrays. They're special types of objects. Meaning, I can have, right? I can say let some function, right, equal to a function. Boop, 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 boop. Little console log action, right? I'm a function. I'm a fun function. Super fun. Cool? What would happen if I just simply said some, whoa, that's not right. Too many memes. Some function. What do you think happens? I am referencing the object, all right? This is it. This is the function object. It could tell you exactly, tells you exactly what's in it. How do I execute this line of code? Parentheses, right? So I can do some function, and I can invoke it. I can make this function execute. Cool? I'm a fun function. Important thing to note here, why is this say undefined? That's right, there's no return value. In this function, is there anywhere where I say return and then something, something, something? No. So it will run the function, console log, and then it will return what? Undefined, because I never specified it to return.
Can you say it's the equivalent to Ruby where you put puts and that returns nil?
No, Ruby has what is known as implied returns, implicit returns, and JavaScript, there's only one exception to that. It's almost always explicit returns. Cool? Great. If this is in fact an object, can I do some function and then add in, right, some cool attributes? Coolio. Man, that is cool. What if I do some function? What should I see? Stop trying to look. I see you guys like peeking on the bottom. What should I see? Clowns. Just the functions. How can I possibly see whether or not it was attached? Well, I can run it, right? And what was it? Some cool attribute? I forgot. And there it is, actually returns. I can just simply add key value pairs to this object like I normally would. That's crazy. It is. But it's okay. It's going to be fine. Here's what you can do. You can ask the directory, and you can pass in some function, and you will see the function return with all of its attributes. Oh, look, there's an attribute on it. Please note that there are more than one way to do things. So you have your old log over here, right? Good old logger. Then you have your console.warn, right? Good old warning, warning, danger, but will run. Then there's like console.error. There's a lot of different things. Console.table. Cool. Take your time to dig into these console docs. Great. Any questions as to functions as special types of objects? I can attach attributes to them or key value pairs. I can reference them, and then I can invoke them. Can you do all three? Just a quick thumbs up. Right? Right. Great. What a time to be alive. Cool. So invocation versus the definition. I like pancakes. Here I'm doing which one? This is the definition, and here I'm just referencing, and here I am what? Invoking. Cool. Thank you, Andrew. Please burn this into your memory. You will, plenty of times, just like you forget the return statement in JavaScript, you will constantly refer to them when you mean to invoke them, and actually vice versa. And we'll learn about those later. Cool? Sometimes you just want to reference. Sometimes you just want to invoke. Notice when you are doing what. Cool? Great. Boop, 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 boop. Boop, boop, boop. Great. See this right here? I just have functions or objects. You can return nice here. And then functions or objects dot name. I'm adding this attribute to it. And that will work. Cool? And the console.dir will give me all of the attributes. Awesome. So there's something called an expression, and there's something called declaration. Do you know the difference? I've said them a couple times, but again, I'm just using these keywords so that you know what they are and when I say something, and when you say something, you know what you are saying.
So a expression is when you assign it a variable, and then when you.
Anyone else? That's okay. You just try, right? The whole point is that you should try, because when you're asking for help, you're being asked a question on an interview, or when one of us is trying to help you, we will be using these terms. Like, hey, do you mean to invoke this function? That's something you should understand. Or something when I say, hey, you're just declaring it here, but you never use it. Do you know what I mean when I say you're just declaring it, right? This will help you debug, especially when you're doing, as this class loves to do, as I could see from your class mascot, rubber duck debugging. You have to be using these words.
The declaration has a letter constant in it, so because I know when you get the error, it says you already declared it, so that may also assign the value, whereas this expression is just the declaration involves the actual I thought that was constant, say putting a space in memory for a variable.
Yeah, you could say that. That's pretty good. You had something?
Yeah, so like when you did the var and then variable and then the name, that's a declaration.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? Yes. And then when you assigned it to something, that was an expression.
Yes. Does everyone want me to go over that? I mean, it's like right here in this statement. Cool, so you have expression, declaration, like invocation or like execute. There's a lot of terms. I know it's a lot of terms, which is why, again, who feels a little bit better because they did the readmes over the weekend? Imagine walking in on day one on this and you haven't done it. It's powerful, painful. Cool? Cool. All right. Last thing I want to go over is type checking. Cool? What does type checking really kind of look like to you inside JavaScript? Yes, it is simply calling dot class, right? So if I were to say type of, and then I were to say this string, what should I get? String, right? Or like anything.
That's an update that Java
Right?
said.
Type of, and then 7. It's a number. Just checking the class. Can I do type of and pass it in an array?
Yeah.
What will I get though?
Object.
Cool. There is a way to check to see if something is an array. I'll let you use your Google magic for that. But just know that type of simply returns the type of data structure that it is. Does that make sense?
The
Console is an object? I think so. Yeah. Cool. Are there questions on type of?
If you do type of, with parentheses, and you pass it in array with an uppercase, it returns you a function. It says it's a function. So it's different than the array.
So you're saying type of, and I pass in array, and it says function. Okay.
So it's different.
So what is array here? Array is a function. Cool. All right. It's not perfect. There are weird isms to JavaScript. And at this point, I would simply, why is array a function in JavaScript? Cool. It's how they created the special type of object. Cool. All right. A couple things I want to run through is this debugger. Who has run bybug or binding.pry in their code? Why are not all of your hands up? This is terrible.
I thought you meant in Java.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I just meant ever. That's my fault. It's my fault. So in JavaScript, we have the debugger. Cool. So in the debugger, it works exactly the same way. I can have a function, awesome, boop, 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 and it could just be log, awesome, the string, just kidding. Boop, boop. And if I wanted to, I can simply put debugger right here, just like this. Boop. And what it will do is, if I hit refresh on, it will pause my code, right? So it'll tell me exactly where my code I'm at. Do I have access to awesome here?
No.
No, right? It works in the same way. It pauses the execution of your code. Cool? Are there any questions? You can do interesting, cool things with the debugger, which we will go over later, but you can step over into the next function. You can run continue, and you can drop multiple debuggers. All right? There's also breakpoints in the dev console, but we won't get into that. The other thing you want to do is you want to console log everything. If you don't know what something is, how did you debug it in Rails or Ruby? You drop the binding, you drop the bybug, and then once it paused it in there, you did what? Great, what are params? What are params at the key of this? Question everything. The debugger doesn't work as perfectly. There are certain times where you can't call it, and you'll run into those errors. Simply drop a console log to see what it is that you want inside your iterator, inside your iteration. Console log, what is I at this time? Console log, what is this in this map function? What is this, the keyword this? Just so you could see it. Cool? Some cool things is if you start your string with this %c, it is going to be looking for a second argument, and you can pass it in any CSS attribute. So you can put color green, color gold, color fire brick. And what you'll see is it'll actually log, in case you have a million of them, you can color code your logs. Cool? Any questions on the debugger? Yes?
Does the debugger have a console like try and my book?
This is it right here. This is the console. I'm sorry, that's my fault. If I were to go back in and drop the debugger back, inside the console, I should have access. This console, when it's paused inside the debugger, will have access to your code. Actually, it didn't run just now, but yeah, the console here. Cool? This is what is known as putting in breakpoints, and we'll get into that later. But are there any questions as to the debugger? We're going to be using it a lot, right, in lecture, like a million times. So just know that it exists, see it, learn it, love it, use it very, very often. Wouldn't it be nice to just wrote perfect code all the time? All right, so as always, documentation is amazing, right? The MDN docs are the way to go for any JavaScript. So if you're looking for something, all right, you know how it was like, oh, form 4, and then you put Rails in your Google query? It could just be, instead of JavaScript something, 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 it could be, how do I find out if an object is an array in JavaScript? And then I would put MDN. The Mozilla Developer Network is the single source of truth for your JavaScript. W3 Schools is great, but MDN. Check MDN first. If MDN does not give you the answer, then you could probably click on Stack Overflow and stuff, and then you can ask like us. Right? MDN is the truth. Cool? Here's the short history of JavaScript. I will be adding to these external resources, like about all different things you can do with console, and a couple other things to reference. Please do the labs, read through these resources, and our last words will be from the great Chrome Boy, and then you go to lunch.
If you are not in the habit of properly indenting your code,
Oh, yes.
please do yourself a favor. Do everybody a favor
Ugh.
and learn how to indent properly.
Yeah.
Because if you cannot follow your indentation to figure out where a curly bracket is supposed to begin and end, you will be in hell.
Yeah.
This, right? Something like this, I have no idea where this begins or ends.
Stop the madness.
You can possibly be lying. So please.
And what's the verdict on semicolons? Like, is it
Okay, the verdict on semicolons is learn it. If you do not master it, it's okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir. There is.